Day 489 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia is sitting on more than 226,000 military personnel losses. Then, as for hardware, 5 tanks, 14 APVs, and a whopping 28 artillery systems. And that's clearly a lot more artillery and APVs than tanks in what is due to Russia simply no longer having enough tanks to field in their defensive operations concerning Ukrainian counterattacks. Then moving back to the map, as following the harrowing weekend for Russia, Ukraine has slowly picked up steam on all major fronts. As for instance, Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces continue to make advancements on the north and south of the city. So, for instance, in the north, Berkivka is wildly contested, if we zoom right in, as small a settlement as it is. Then on the south, the AFU continue to chip away at positions near Klishchivka and Kurdimivka. So zoom a bit out there. So those two locations here. Oh, and in many instances, forcing the retreat of leftover Russian forces in the area, particularly in the south. So the balance of power has clearly changed here in the last 30 days or so. And here's a good example of that. So take the Western Highway settlement of Ivaniska, for instance, right there. As you might remember a time just a few short months ago that it looked like all hope was lost for this town as it was surrounded by the Russian forces, which you can still see clearly indicated there in the now liberated areas in green and blue. So it did look a little touch and go there for a moment. But it just ended up being the extreme height of Russian successes in this region. And specifically, it was the Wagner forces that milked out the largest successes here, which weren't that much for 9 months worth of work. However, due to the Wagner forces not getting or receiving enough ammo from the Russian MOD, but also in my humble estimation, running out of cannon fodder from, say, prisons and from enticing Eastern Russian minorities into some contracts, they chose to vacate at the height of their achievable success on May the 24th, and probably just to make them look good. And then, of course, the whole PMC was threatened into dissolving into the official Russian army's ranks, and then as per the weekend's events, the rest was history. Then we'll head on down to the southern front with the big news, of course, being that Rivnopol was liberated by the Ukrainian forces. So just zoom down there, and here we go. And we'll go back in time on the date map, just for a moment there. As you might remember the other day, I zoomed into right here and said that given the natural obstacles on either side and creating a bit of a choke point, that it was simply an inevitability that this totally exposed Russian units and that their days were clearly numbered. And so all of these liberation events, go back forward in time, are not without their liberation photos, of course. Now, the implications for this liberation means that this will make a go for Staromioska, so this settlement here where Russian forces are now forced to directly defend, has now allowed for the AFU to gain much better access to that front line or contact point of sorts there. And in fact, just south of the settlement, today we saw a Russian T-80 tank getting hit by a Ukrainian loitering munition, causing the Russian tankies to abandon ship. And so just for a little bit of better context with the Ukrainian successes here recently, in total, an area of 120 square kilometers has been liberated in just this one Velika Novosilka front since the beginning of Ukraine's counteroffensive, just a few short weeks ago. And so that roughly is 3 times the size of Russia's Bakhmut capture, which took them 9 months to do. And I'm not even taking into account the Ukrainian liberated surface area nearby on the Zaporizhia front, so more easterly, as you can see there as well. So it's all pretty impressive. In fact, the difference is truly night and day when put in a bit of better context like that. And then also, somewhere along the southern front line recently, in true Russian bad loser style, as Russia was losing some positions in the field on the contact point, so they busted out a Geneva Convention banned chemical aerosol munition substance, which has a suffocating effect on those exposed. However, even the wind was against Russians that day recently, as the wind blew back the gas into those Russian positions. And just to add insult to injury on that front, Russian units are extremely ill-equipped. This is something we already know, with the vast majority lacking the gas masks to protect themselves. Whereas the armed forces of Ukraine are both well-equipped with the gas masks and are expecting Russian forces to make total dick moves like this anyway. It's actually all very karmically poetic, which is the name I almost originally gave to this channel or video series. Oh, and also because we're here on the Zaporizhia southern front, Ukrainian President Zelensky visited the armed forces of Ukraine at the frontline positions in the going into the Berdyansk direction, in fact. There was also plenty of selfies and handshaking to be had too. Which all reminds me of how Zelensky said during the early hours of the invasion last year, quote, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Which is actually in quite stark contrast to last weekend's Russian fiasco when Wagner forces got within Putin mutiny range of Moscow. And so guess what Putin did? He needed a ride, not ammunition, as he literally got on a plane and cowardly fled to some location near St. Petersburg up north. And again, we're talking about night and day differences with leadership here, and just about the testicular fortitude of each of those leaders involved. Then we'll head just next door to the Kherson Oblast today, as in the last couple of days, the Ukrainian forces created a bridgehead as they crossed over the Dnieper River to attain some new positions in the largely occupied, Russian-occupied south, and just north of Aleshki, for instance, there, which is opposite from Kherson, the city itself. And so then, Russian forces seem to be ordered to commence some sort of an assault counterattack operation, driving a single BMP-2 infantry vehicle heading north on the Kakonka bridge, as it was driving pretty obviously into the direction of the newly held Ukrainian positions. However, it proceeded to then run over what likely may have been one of Russia's very own laid mines, as Russian forces tend to lay them unaccounted for and pretty indiscriminately when they start to lose their own positions there. But, you know, that's our Russia. And with this event, it's likely we're seeing a small squad or two of Ukrainian forces with a landing party as they seek to perform ground recon and set the scene for adding additional units for setting upcoming fortifications just south of the river, which is pretty impressive to say the least, as it's just simply not a good look for Russia to lose all of their control of the south side of the Dnieper there. Then we'll head across to Crimea as Russian air defense systems continue to spectacularly fail in Storm Shadow tests, as this time just slightly northwest of the town of Kirovsko, right there, in very eastern Russian-occupied Crimea, 220 kilometers from the front lines in Ukraine, there where the AFU struck a military installation. Then we'll head across to some news for today. So as for a bit of a Prigozhin update once more. So the Wagner PMC boss Prigozhin published his first audio address since his armed rebellion in Russia ended. And in his 11-minute audio address, he claimed that he and his Wagner PMC forces didn't march to overthrow Russia's leadership, and that he regretted that he had no choice but to strike at Russian aviation in reference to the 7 Russian aircraft and 15 Russian airmen crew that Wagner used their anti-aircraft weaponry to eliminate. And he also labelled it as a march, which aimed to prevent the dissolution of the Wagner PMC, and said how he wanted to hold those accountable, such as Russian generals Shoigu and Gerasimov, for the mistakes made during the special military operation. Although I'm quite sure the brokered deal between him and Russian leadership included, for his security and the security of his PMC forces, that he, not give any blame out or take any aim at Putin, especially as Putin loves to take no accountability for when things go wrong, and B, that the Wagner PMC forces can still exist and operate somewhere, likely Belarus it's looking at this moment. And so Prigozhin is still very much alive, reportedly also just spotted at a hotel in Minsk in the last day. All as Putin is attempting to conjure up his next move. And so let's take a look at the Putin side of the story now. As Putin made a recently updated address to the country, which was quite convoluted in nature, saying that some of the Wagnerites are patriots and deserve recognitions, yet others performed mutiny, and spewed the narrative of how all Russians united against Wagner, which is quite far from reality. Oh, and my favourite part, proclaiming very decisively, saying that a Wagner armed rebellion would have failed in any case, which I take a lot of issue with, as Russia doesn't have any notable military resources to pull from in Moscow at the moment due to tying up the vast majority of its military forces in Ukraine. And if a deal was not brokered between the two, really, Prigozhin and Putin, the Kremlin could have fallen, and the Ukraine war or the invasion into Ukraine from Russia could have very likely disintegrated as well. And so moving on with this, Putin also seemed to not enforce, but rather suggest that Wagner soldiers can stay with Wagner, maybe in Belarus, or choose to take up contracts with the regular Russian army if they wanted. It was all very much left seeming like an option, which is quite the backpedal from Putin's previous position of disbandment of the Wagner PMC forces in their entirety. Ah, Putin. Strong with the weak, and weak with the strong. So it was very much the anticlimactic speech for which Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov hyped up as just some hours earlier, expecting it to be a real blower. And then even former Russian Donbass commander and military blogger Igor Girkin got in on some of the action as he gave his 2 cents on Telegram saying, quote, "I haven't seen anything more pitiful in the performance of a man remotely resembling the president." And a comment which garnered a lot of thumbs up and 100% emoji reactions on the platform. And Igor would be at least some approximation of right here, as he'd illuminated the fact that for Putin to make a deal like this just shows tremendous weakness on Putin's part. But this story is all still very far from over at this point, I'd say. Then in a quick funny to round it all off with today, guys, so on late night Russian state media TV, the usual suspects are unhappy about letting Prigozhin go for now, but also coming to terms with the military coup and expressing how scary war and civil unrest in their own backyards would be, in what was remarkably a tone-deaf sentiment, as at the very same time they're attempting to invade another country right next door. I mean, really? Then they got into some mental gymnastics of trying to understand how Prigozhin was seemingly able to get away with all of said civil unrest. And I say mental gymnastics because they can say anything except for being critical of the Russian government and Putin himself. Which is all very interesting stuff, because in Russia, it very much appears so far that you can get away with a military rebellion, but you still can't display a blank piece of paper in the Red Square in Moscow without going to jail. So this is some more of that strong with the weak and weak with the strong stuff. And just lastly, I'll add in here, even Russia's top propagandist, Solovyov, was having a hard time coming to terms later at night during his live monologue rant or whatever it is, trying to understand what exactly just happened with his country. So that'll be it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, please leave a comment, subscribe, and I really do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.